Buddy's name.
I forget everybody's names too in books.
And real life.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be chatting spoilers for Elantris, and we will not be talking Cosmere spoilers until the end of the portion where we talk about Elantris. So if you've not really read that much of the Cosmere, don't worry. And when we do, we'll put this banner up so you know it's going to be Cosmere spoilers. At the end, we'll talk about the Hope of Elantris and then Emperor's Soul. So you don't have to worry if you haven't read those yet. We're only going to be talking about Elantris first, and then we'll segue into those. But kicking it off with Elantris, we'll start with just overall thoughts, and I'll let Sophia kick it off. What are your overall thoughts for Elantris?
And I want to know how many times you've read it.
Oh, how many times have I read it? I think I've read it 3 times. I think 3. It might be 4, but I think it's 3. And I really like it. I think it gets pooped on a lot. Not that people don't like it, but they just think it's the worst of Sanderson. And I disagree. I really like it. I enjoy the themes. I enjoy the characters. I enjoy the tone. So yeah, it's one of my favorites, actually.
Oh, Abby, how about for you?
I've not quite read it 3 times. I've read it twice, though. And I also really, really liked it. So I think I read it back in like 2016 or something originally. And back then I hadn't really explored much of the Cosmere. I'd just read the Mistborn trilogy Era 1 and then this. And I really, really enjoyed this one at that time. And then when I reread it, I continued to really enjoy it. And I was like, as Sophia said, I don't quite understand why it gets so much poo-pooed on.
Both of you being so nice about it.
Well, I wanted to swear, but I thought I don't know what your demographic in this Patreon is like. Be like.
And I just
very
copied Sophia's words.
What about you, Jesse?
I've also read it twice.
No, that's good.
That's it. Okay.
I've also read it twice. And the first time I read it, I had actually read quite a bit of the Cosmere first. So I actually went in with no expectations because I heard so many people be like, it's the worst of the Cosmere, like it's not that good. And I'd read like pretty much all of Stormlight, all of Mistborn, like all of I read Warbreaker. And I went into it like with 0 expectations. I was like, why does everybody hate this? It's fantastic. Like you can see where it's an earlier of his works. But it was still like, why? Because I love this, and I now want that sequel that we all want, I think, at this point.
I think that those are higher priority. And I should say, I'm the same as you, Jessie. I had read pretty much everything in the Cosmere apart from Mistborn Era 2. When I read Elantris, it was the last thing I read other than Era 2. So,
Abby, are you popular right now?
Oh, we've got a locksmith coming that was meant to come in like December or something. And I think it's finally being organised for tomorrow. So it's like, are you home tomorrow? Are you not home tomorrow? So that was all it was.
They're very persistent.
Well, at least you can get whatever you need unlocked.
Yeah.
So,
I find what's interesting about Elantris is I didn't ask... I even have a prompt of how does it compare to other Cosmere Sanderson novels. And I do think it's interesting that is kind of where people go with it anyway. It's almost like it's impossible for people, and not saying that like, oh, we're all so stupid. I just mean it's almost like it's impossible for us to talk about Elantris without having all of the other parts of the Cosmere or people's perceptions of Elantris in comparison. That seems to be so at the forefront of our mind that it feels like we can't talk about it without incorporating those things, which I think is really interesting. If I try to isolate it and just think about Elantris on its own, I think that I enjoyed it, but I definitely have criticisms. And I think that the pacing is part of that for me. So it feels, I think, Jesse, you were saying this as well, that I like it, but there are aspects of it that feel like a first published novel. And I try not to, I don't always like saying, oh, it was good for a debut. It's because that's so condescending. But at the same time, you do expect authors to grow as they write more books. and they try different things and they kind of come into their own. They figure out what they like to write, or they figure out the voice that they like to have in their writing, what they like to emphasize. And in a way, I thought Elantris in some aspects almost feels a little, hi, Roger, yay. Hopefully the camera works out for you now. But in some ways, I feel like Elantris is a little safe, like almost a little vanilla in some ways, because it felt like we didn't lean too much into the magic. We don't lean too much into the world itself. We don't get too large. We don't get too zeroed in on one character and their mental health and everything. It's kind of, it does its job delivering on all those things, but I don't think it exceeds in any one particular area for me. Just kind of all around pretty good. Roger, the question is just overall thoughts for Elantris. What were your overall thoughts?
Probably pretty similar to that. I mean, I think it's fun. I think it's probably the most like political he does. It's like very kind of focused on like political intrigue, but it's not like the best political intrigue that I've ever read either. So I think it's like good, but it's not amazing or my fave.
So the other question too is, how does it compare to other Cosmere Sanderson novels? And a lot of us kind of touched on that when talking about our overall thoughts, but we'll go ahead and dive a little deeper into this without spoiling other Cosmere books. How for you does it compare? And Roger, you can kick this one off since you had to go last on the last question.
I think my favorite things about Sanderson are his world building and his magic systems. And I think that this magic system is my least favorite. I don't find it as interesting. And the world is so much more focused on just the one city. We don't really get that much of like the overall world. Katya's attacking the bottom of the tripod, so if it wiggles, it's because of her. So it's probably my least favorite of his overall works. I don't think it's a bad book, but it's compared to the other Cosmere Sanderson, it's probably my least favorite that I've read. Besides Frugal Wizards or Frugal whatever the hell that.
It's not Cosmere, doesn't count.
Jesse, how do you feel it compares?
In comparison, it's hard because I love so much of it, but I have to say it might be my least favorite Cosmere book just because of how much I love the other ones. But like, it's so hard to rank it in there because it's like, I really liked it, so it's not bad, but then saying like it's my least favorite makes it sound like it's bad. But it's no, the others are just...
It feels so negative to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it might be like my lowest of the 5-star ratings. Like...
Right. Abby, do you feel that way?
I think you can see like the grounding blocks for like lots of the themes that he explores in the rest of his books, or like things that he dives into in much greater detail in other books, and similar themes that have, I don't know, wider, bigger meanings in his other books. So you can sort of see where he's got to with the rest of his novels, and see how he's grown as an author, which sounds again a little bit condescending. I don't know if you can hear my fan at all. Is it distracting at all? Okay, good. It decides to come on when it feels like it. It's very temperamental. But I don't think it's not my least favorite Cosmere book, because I think compared to like Mistborn Era 2, which I think it would be my least favorite, I prefer like the setting and the magic. Not that I didn't like the magic in Mistborn Era 2, because I loved it in Mistborn, but I think I prefer the sort of more medievally traditional fantasy style setting that we get in Elantris, and I guess the rest of the Cosmere books compared to, say, Mistborn Era 2.
That makes sense.
What do you think, Sophia?
Yeah, I'm similar to Abby. This one's really up there for me. I think it beats Mistborn Era 2 for me pretty easily. I know, Jesse, you really like Era 2, but Era 2 is very like iffy for me. And it also beats Warbreaker, which I think is not true for many people.
Sacrilege. Sacrilege.
I know. I'm
Roger's
sorry.
like, bye.
I do always come with the divisive opinions on Sanderson stuff. Like, I like Elantris better than Warbreaker. I'm not a huge Sazed fan. Like, Just shoot me, it's fine. Basically, I think he has 3 books that are like primarily political, and those are Well of Ascension, Elantris, and Warbreaker. And Well of Ascension is my favorite of those 3, but then Elantris and then Warbreaker. So I think that's why it ends up there. And yeah, I think we'll get into it when we speak about the characters and stuff, but I think a lot of why I like Elantris so much is because I connect with a lot of the things that go on in the story more than I do some of the other Cosmere books. And I can't ever compare Cosmere to non-Cosmere, because Cosmere is just superior to non-Cosmere, just in general, overall anyway. It doesn't matter what book you are, you're never going to beat a Cosmere book. So that's me.
I think that, Abby, you were kind of starting with this, and I'll piggyback on the idea that it feels like you can see a lot of what he eventually built upon. The foundation of that is in Elantris in a lot of ways. I mean, so many of the characteristics of, I don't know how all of you say it, but Serene or Serene, it feels like pieces of her are in Shallan, or pieces of Raiden are in Kelsier, with that, like, the hope and instilling that in people and trying to get people to persevere and rise up above their circumstances. And those sorts of things, I feel like you see explored more. So in a lot of ways, it's hard for me to not think of Elantris in relation to the other Cosmere books as the, let's test the waters with a lot of different things I'm interested in, and then we'll go deeper into those things. And you were saying, Sophia, the way it compares politically to something like Well of Ascension, which I think, same as you, I think Well of Ascension does the politics much better. I think one of my criticisms is, as much as I like political fantasy, I feel like there were certain details or scenes that you could almost entirely take out, and it wouldn't have really affected the overall story or plot that much, and it might have enhanced the pacing a little bit, or we could have focused on some other things a little bit more. And then Roger was talking about the magic in the world. This is one of the few times that I come away being like, I don't really know what the magic was, in a sense, because so much of Sanderson's books are, here's this magic and here's how it works. And a big mystery in Elantris is what happened. Why did they go from being these angelic beings to almost cursed zombies? And that mystery is something that I'm so accustomed to him laying the foreshadowing and the pieces there in a way that feels very satisfying. And in this one, it's like, I'll just wait till he tells me, if that makes sense. Because I just don't feel like the grasp on the magic is as much there for me as the reader as it is in other Sanderson Cosmere works. So I do think, though, that if somebody doesn't like the really intense, almost tutorial type of magic, or if they prefer the worlds to be a little more contained, then I think that Elantris could actually be much more to their liking. And then, Abby, you were talking about how it feels a little more traditional in its setting to a lot of other fantasy works. And in a way, I feel like that's part of why it seems as though Sanderson hadn't quite maybe felt comfortable with what his view of fantasy could be, that kind of sci fantasy. It feels like it was almost influenced a little bit by what came before and what he loved and what he'd probably read a lot of. And it feels like there's a little bit of a stamp on that on Elantris, like all those other works that put a stamp on it. And then from there he launched into, are you saying Emperor's Soul? I know, as soon as I said stamp, I was like, oh, I'm gonna try not to. But I still like it. I don't it's hard because if we're talking individual Cosmere books, I think I enjoyed this more than a couple of the others. But overall, as I actually think it would have maybe for me benefited from being a duology, because there's certain things I wish we could have elaborated on more. There's certain things I wish we could have taken our time on more. Part of it would be the whole, like, I don't know how you all say Hrathen. I feel like his character could have been so interesting, and he was, but he was not as interesting as if I think he had been in a later Sanderson book, because then I think he would have been a much more interesting character for me. It seems though like we all are fairly positive on it. It's not like we all hate it the way that some people really don't like it, but I do kind of want to ask what your criticisms are. And Jesse, I'll let you start, and then we'll go to Roger from there.
I don't know. It feels like weird, Chris, like, Jake, you don't want to be mean, but like some of it, I know because it was his first book. I think one of the things that bothered me personally the most was even expecting it. It's like the minimal connections. Because obviously it's one of the first books. You're not going to see those. And I was like, that's what I like in the Cosmere is all the like very blatant connections. Because I miss so many and have to ask Sophia like, hey, did I see this right? But that was the one thing. And then honestly, I don't like the formatting of the one person, two person, three person, one person, two person, three person. I don't know why that like bothers me for some reason. It's like we jump from one chapter, one perspective, the other chapter, another perspective. So like a lot of mine is more like the formatting of it because it was just like, and then the magic did kind of confuse me, which that might be a me problem. But like you said, I was kind of like, I don't know if I just didn't fully register it at first. Like on reread, I got it more. But like on my first read, I was like, wait, what did I'm confused.
It feels like it's less integral in a way. It's kind of the thing everything relies on in a sense, as far as the solving of the mystery of what happened. But at the same time, from one chapter to the next, it doesn't feel like magic really. It almost feels like there isn't magic in a sense until like Ash floats into view, and then you're like, oh yeah, there's this.
Yeah, you're like, wait, I get it now. But like, it took me a while to like. I was very confused for a large chunk of it.
Roger, as I think you kind of mentioned your criticisms before, that it just doesn't have as much magic and world as you like from Sanderson.
You know, I'm not a mainly character-driven girly. I'm much more plot-focused, and this one feels more meandery. Like we're kind of just chilling in the city, trying to figure out our little bit of a mystery, and like it was interesting, but it wasn't enough. It was much more character-focused and like driven than I think I prefer. Because it's a lot more about the dynamics with Hrothan and the crazy monk dude, and like it's all of this like kind of interpersonal tension rather than like something super large like some of his other books. Because I read Mistborn first, and so that had like the crazy off the rails cataclysmic stuff, and you had really compelling characters. And this one is more compelling characters and a little bit of mystery, and that's just not my fave.
It's interesting because when you were first saying you feel like it's not as plot driven, I was like, I don't know if I feel that way. But how you described, like you were saying, it's more interpersonal tension. It feels less like we're getting a really close examination of the characters themselves. So it's maybe not character focused in that way, but I agree that it's very kind of small scale from one chapter to the next, and it sort of builds. But I think for me, I was saying before too, I just don't feel like I have as firm of a grasp on the world and the magic. And a lot of the politics, and I don't mind this in political fantasy when it feels like you reference other places or you reference other trade deals or things like that, but you may maybe never see so much of that because it does add an element of realism. Like what we do here affects everyone and people that you're never going to meet in the story. So I don't mind that, but I still feel like there were certain details that could have been maybe we could have spent some less time on those and then more time on some other things. And then I would have liked to have felt more connected to the characters themselves. I don't think I feel like Jesse, where I want to see all those Cosmere connections necessarily, but I do wish I don't know what it is. These characters are almost not flawed enough, but they're also not quite heroic enough and awesome enough and larger than life either. They just sort of exist. So I almost wish there was a little bit more to them. I think that Serene, I think she had maybe the most for me development. Raoden was almost too perfect. He was like if Kelsier didn't have that edge where you're like, I don't know if this guy is totally stable. He doesn't quite have that the same way. And so like I said before, there's almost a sense of it being a little safe, a little vanilla. And I think I would have wanted a little bit more. And the Sanderlanche I didn't feel was as satisfying as my usual. Like once it starts, it's really exciting and I was pumped about it, but I do feel like it kind of almost went too quick in a sense. Like I wish some of the reveals we'd had a little more time with, so that then when the Sanderlanche hit, I felt like the stakes were a lot higher. But I do think that that's another thing that he's gotten even better with. It's just, I wonder too, for people that read, and some of you have noted this, if you read Elantris before reading the rest of the Cosmere, does that make Elantris more or less favorable because you're not going back and reading it and then sort of seeing like, oh, well, you can tell it's a first, or having these expectations of what you want from it. I don't know.
Well, I feel like the
Sophia,
magic almost relies on knowing other Cosmere stuff, because to make sense of the magic and how the investiture is working with the connection to the land, you only kind of understand in hindsight with more Cosmere knowledge. You really have no idea what's going on the first time you read Elantris. At least I didn't.
take it at face value.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I guess they needed, like, the line was off because of the division. And Sophia, what do you think if you have criticisms for it?
I don't really, and I think all of the criticisms you've all raised are the reasons that I like it so much. I like that it's character focused. I think something I'm learning about my own reading taste, particularly the last couple of years, is that I actually like slow books, and I like books where it's more introspective and there's not a huge amount going on. And I really liked The Sound of Lunch, especially the fact that part of it involves him running down a hill. It just feels like it completes the whole
The literal, like an
literally going down a hill kind of thing. So yeah, it's not a satisfactory answer, but I can't think of any criticisms off the top of my head just now, no.
Abby, I don't think we've gotten to yours, correct? Because we kind of looped around. You're muted.
I think I had maybe more criticisms like the first time around that I read it, and in that the first time I wasn't a massive fan of the priests Harathan's chapters. That I was just like, why is he here? I'm a bit bored of this guy. Can we go back to Serene and Rayoden's point of views? Like, it felt more of a chore getting through his chapters. But then I didn't feel that way when I read it the second time around, and maybe that's I appreciated them more, or I could understand the reasoning behind those chapters more. Maybe it was just that I'd not changed as a reader, but grown as a reader and had different feelings towards it. So on the second time around, I think I had less of a negative perception of those parts of the book.
I do think Hrathen, I don't know how other people say his name, but Hrathen
on the audio.
More of an A. So I do think he's the first taste of Sanderson's irony, playing around with tropes, because he's like, what if there's a priest whose responsibility it is to basically convert an entire country, but also he doesn't really have much faith anymore, so he's just kind of going through the motions, and he likes the logical side of, first I will convince them of this, and then I will make them feel this way, but he's not really doing it out of any sense of this is what must be done because we have to say. He doesn't have that. So I do like that. I like the concept of his character so much. I just wish we could have gotten into it more. And then I do think we'll get into characters here in a second, but this sort of falls under criticisms. I like the idea that without ever really knowing each other, he did always have to push against Serene's plans, her political maneuverings, and they were sort of enemies. But then there's this, like, I don't think it was a romantic love, but he loved the challenge that she provided, because it mentions at the end that he loved her in a sense. And I was like, that's a little, I wish we'd seen a little more of them having to go head to head, because I think that would have made more sense. And then this, like, Hrathen saved us all in the end. And I was like, did he? I mean, like, I feel like Raiden did, I feel like Serene did. I feel like this respect that we gave him in the end was because he helped you out at the very end. And I get that was important, but I'm like, was it more important than some of the others? So it almost felt like unearned a little bit, some of the language used surrounding these characters, where I'm like, I didn't get that impression really from that character. In fact, what if he just didn't interfere at all? That would have been nice. You wouldn't have had to worry so much, I guess Deloff would have shown up anyway. But also, I wish we'd gotten more of his backstory, because it sounded so interesting, and that whole group of people with Deloff and them having these powers, and you get a tiny glimpse of Hrathen's trauma when he was a boy and he was like locked in this, like, hiding and stuff. I'm like, what? I want to know more about him. And so I think it would have made his death so much more impactful. But we'll get into characters now, because I'm already kind of diving into those. Do you have a favorite character, least favorite character? What are your thoughts about the characters in general? And Sophia, since this is kind of the bread and butter for you with Elantris, we'll let you start it.
I think for me, my favorite is Serene. I'll say it's Serene because that's what they say on the audiobook. And I think, and Abby may well relate to this as well, I think the thing about Serena that I like the most is that she's not this tiny woman that you could wrap one hand around. Like, she's a tall woman who is like average sized, and that is part of the character. And I really appreciated that, because it's almost become like this comical thing in all literature, particularly romance, but sometimes fantasy as well, that
Tiny woman and the massive
tiny,
guy.
tiny woman and the massive man. And I'm like, there's a place for that, but not every woman is tiny. Can we just move on?
Not every man's massive.
Like, well, yeah, like sometimes men are short. That is also a thing. So I think that a big part of her character is in the fact that she is tall, and she's taller than most other women that she's around as well, and that impacts upon how people interact with her. And then she's also in this new place with new people that don't know her, and she's dealing with I love the way that she deals with misogyny. It just is hilarious to me, the way that she's just like, yeah, I'm just going to let you think that I'm some silly bimbo who's trying to paint a horse but it actually looks like a boat or something, like whatever it was that you compared it to, but actually I'm really sneaky and I'm doing this intentionally. And I love everything about the way that Serene's character is at the start, and the way that it grows, and the way that she is just she wants to solve these problems. So Serena's definitely my favorite, and Diaf is just like the most detestable, just awful. I mean, Sanderson doesn't do villains as well as Robin Hobb, but Dilaf is a pretty good one as far as his annoying, contemptible villains go. And also his name just annoys me. It's like, you sound like rice. Dilaf, Pilaf, come on. No.
I do want to add with Serene or Serene that there's that line about how in her home country, they definitely respect women much more than they do here.
Mhm.
But then she says something or thinks something along the lines of they are kind of proud of themselves for allowing women to have more freedom and seeing them as valuable, as if they are the ones that, but there's still the idea that they had to allow it in the first place.
Mhm.
And I really liked that line. I also like that she is someone who, I think the exploration of wanting to have a partner, wanting to have a family, wanting to have love is a very difficult thing to navigate in stories, because it makes it seem as though this character doesn't value themselves. And we see nowadays a lot of the strong female character is the one that doesn't need anyone. And it's not that they need someone, but a lot of people want companionship, friendship, a partner. And so I think to explore that, I actually think it was explored pretty well. And it's a difficult thing to explore. But I think that how it was navigated, I mean, there's a couple times where you're like, it's okay, Serene. But I think for the most part, it's navigated really well. And it shows, I wish we'd see that with characters more often in general. I think that the idea of wanting a partner is not a bad thing. Wanting more companionship and more respect from people, because she realizes too, she isolates herself unintentionally by pushing against the status quo. And that's sad, because then even with the other women that she's training, she realizes, like, I'm never going to be their friend. I'm always going to be the person that they look up to. And a lot of these, that's why her friendship with Royale, or however you say it, I was like, it's so cute. Their relationship I thought was adorable, because he's like encouraging of her and respectful, and I feel like he was actually a friend. So anyway, I just wanted to bounce off that, because I do think there's a lot with her character that I really enjoyed. But anyway, Abby, sorry, I jumped in.
I have the same answer as Sophia. It's Serene is my favourite. Was the first time, still was the second time. And I think pretty much a lot of the reasons that Sophia said, I enjoyed reading from her perspective. I felt like she was intelligent. She was in a difficult situation, especially in the beginning, where she'd come to this strange place thinking that she was going to marry this person, to find out that he's dead. And suddenly she's like, oh, well, this is a little bit awkward. Like, what do I do now? And sort of the way that she dealt with that, and her cleverness at sort of getting around the court politics and creating the life for herself there. But I enjoyed reading from her perspective, I think, the most.
Do you feel that way, Roger?
Well, I mean, I think she kind of carries the books. It's her dynamics with other characters that kind of drive everything forward. It's her trying to one up Raoden and sending him useless stuff, and him trying to figure out how to make use of it, and her and Hrathen kind of going back and forth and having all of that stuff. I think arguably she is like the real protagonist of the book, and she kind of drives all of it. I also think Hrathen is kind of interesting. He always reminds me of Frollo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And I always start getting that song in the back of my head because of how he starts getting a little weirdly obsessed with Serene. And now Sophia's never going to unhear it. You're welcome.
No, because he told me that before, and I was like, nope,
When he like
every time.
sniffs the scarf and throws it in the fire, that's Hrathen.
Jesse, are you that way too?
I mean, I do agree. I absolutely love like what you said about the whole concept of Serene wanting a partner and wanting love, but it's not like the driving force of like you need someone. Because I think, like you said, in a lot of books, it's like that. There's no distinction in the fact that it's like you can want companionship and love and things like that without being like, I need to be saved. Like it's one or the other, but really doesn't have to be. I think Hrathen would have been my favorite character if we would have just like leaned more into like like you said, like his backstory and like making him more of an anti-hero-esque and just like really leaning into that, because I love those types of characters. I like the villain that's not a villain, the hero that's not a hero, like that anti-hero dark. Love it. But I think we didn't lean far enough into it for me to be like, Hrathen was my favorite. So definitely kind of I feel the same, like Serene carried the story.
Yeah. I really think he had so much potential. The idea of him, I think, is my favorite, but in actual execution, it wasn't. I don't think I have much else to say as far as I think all of you said similar things. I mean, I think Raoden is a very likable character. He's just, he doesn't really have, there's just not much to him other than like, I just got to keep trying.
He's more of a mechanism for us to learn about the magic than anything else, isn't he, really?
Yeah. And there are other, that might be a criticism I have in general about Cosmere books, is that there tends to be that character, and being able to make them interesting and their chapters as interesting as the other perspectives, it often, depending on the reader, because some readers, like, that's what they want to read about, so then the perspectives are more interesting. But I think that's a complaint of a lot of people's for Way of Kings, is that Shallan's perspective is kind of boring in the first book because she's just learning and trying to be a ward, and so I think you see something similar with Raoden as well. But it's interesting because some of the side characters are actually notable to me, like Karata, I think. Okay, can we just all agree that she should have lived? I feel like her dying right at the end, right before they turned I'm like, really? Because she's the one that had the child, and she's been holding things down as best she could in Elantris for a while, and then she dies right before. I'm like, okay, that's really mean. I feel like she should have lived. And I was really sad when Royal died. I was like, no, not him, because I loved him, and he was just, I liked him a lot. And I actually was I thought the whole idea of him marrying Serene just for the political aspect of it and everything, and he's like, I don't actually expect anything, but then at the same time he's like,
me soon, I'm old, like,
yeah, at the same time I was like, I really liked when he was like, well, darn, I was kind of looking forward to it. I thought that was, I mean, he's just, I don't know, I really liked his character and how everything fell apart, where it was just like the dumb guy being like, I got you this time, and you're like, no, darn it. But I think that I second pretty much everything all of you said, that Serene or Serene's character is probably the main one. And I also I wish she could meet Shallan so that Shallan could see what like true being clever And I don't know. I just feel like the two of them, their dynamics, because she feels like a more mature in some ways. Not trying to hate on Shallan. I just feel like they would maybe Shallan would learn a little in the way of tact. We've been
Serena is
kind
much
of
less damaged than Siobhan, that's for sure.
That's true. She and her dad is kind of
Really?
very cute with her, but at the same time, I'm like, we just glossed over the fact that the dad totally stole the throne from the uncle. I was like, that could have been, I mean, it was more of just like, oh, that's why uncle and dad don't get along. I'll have to rethink some things. That's just a little thing at the end. So I was like, hey, that's not cool. I liked her dad, how much he like loved her though, and he thought she was the best. I'm like, no, because you just don't see very often ever parents, but especially parents that are like really loving of their children in fantasy. I do want to jump into the magic. Yeah, I did want to jump into the magic a little bit. I think a lot of us have been saying that the magic feels the least delved into of a lot of his Cosmere works. But besides that point, are there other things about the magic? I just, in general, feel like I wish I not understood, but I just wish it had been elaborated on a little more. And Jesse, I know you were saying before, like, I don't know if I understand it, but so I'm going to make you start.
I still don't know if I understand it. I think I have a hard time visualizing it with like the map and the. I think it's just I have a really hard time visualizing the magic in this one. So I'm like, wait, like map and lines, and we're moving. Like, what is going on? Like, my brain just doesn't compute it. So, and I don't think we got enough, like you said, for me to really like wrap my head around it. Even on reread, I'm just like, and then maybe that's just like the type of reader I am because I am a very visual person. Like, just not being able to visualize it is like, I don't know what's going on if I can't like form that picture for myself. You know,
am I alone in feeling like it feels the most spell casting type of magic of Sanderson's magic systems?
Definitely
Definitely
like,
not alone, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a Dungeons and Dragons-esque with the hand waving component.
Yeah.
Roger, do you want to continue your thoughts on the magic?
It might feel the most magical of his systems, even though it's not in the story very much because you don't understand it. I feel like a lot of his magic systems have a tendency to feel more like science than anything else, especially when we're getting later in Stormlight or Mistborn or whatever. They start to feel almost scientific. Whereas this one, because it's a little bit more vague and you don't really necessarily understand, especially if you're reading this earlier in your Cosmere journey, it could feel the most magical, I guess, but also it is very D&D-y, which is my bread and butter. You know, I love it. So the magic system is cool. I don't love that story where it's like magic left the world, and at least it does come back. But I hate that setup of like, once upon a time, this place was really awesome, and now it sucks. Like, I hate that so much.
Which is really, truly what this is like. It didn't leave, but what stayed kind of sucks. So I wish it had left, actually. Abby, what do you think?
I like what you said, Roger, about it being the least scientific. It does feel that way, that there are less rules that we know about. I feel like if you're thinking about, I don't know, Mistborn, it's like, if you ingest this, then you can do this. If you do this, then you can do that. And it all has steps and stages, and it's all very spelled out to you very, very clearly. Whereas this one does have that sort of less rule-based, or maybe we just aren't aware of all the rules because of when it was written. He hadn't dived into that scientific approach to magic as yet. Yeah.
Sophia, what do you think?
I find the magic system easy to understand in this one. I'm sorry.
Are we all overthinking it?
No, I don't. I think it's partially what you said, Jessie, that you're a visual reader, right? Like, you need to see in your head how it works. And I never, like, regardless of what I'm reading, I never can see what is going on. So my experience of reading magic systems is totally different than yours, I'm sure, for that reason. And so actually, this one was easier for me to quote unquote see, because there's like the pictures in the back of the copy with all of the, wherever they are, they're here somewhere.
Oh, the aeons or whatever.
Oh yeah.
So I could look at those and understand, oh yeah, so they all come from the same base. And it was almost linguistic in a way, and based on symbols. So I found it easy to understand for that reason. And in terms of like the deeper reasons of, you know, how does the Sheod choose particular individuals, etc., I feel like there's just part of me that just accepts, well, Sanderson plans are the books for these series, and just like we don't know everything at the end of the Final Empire, we don't know everything at the end of Elantris either, but we will eventually figure all of those things out later. So I don't struggle. Funnily enough, I struggle more with the Emperor's Soul than I do with the magic system in Elantris. So yeah.
We will talk about Emperor's Soul later, but I feel like Emperor's Soul is kind of if you combined every magic system of the Cosmere into one. Because there's so many pieces that you're like, that's kind of like this over here, that's kind of like this. Yeah, I think maybe it's that conceptually it's not that difficult, but I agree that with what Jesse's saying also, and you both, that it's not maybe... I think it is that scientific part that I miss. Like, I want it to be a little clearer, I suppose, a little more cut and dry. And I think I want a few more answers. So we mentioned before that if we were, some of you were saying you would want a sequel. If we had a sequel, I almost don't know that I'd want it to be a direct sequel chronologically right after, or that if it was right after, I don't know if I would want it to follow these same characters, because I kind of feel like their story's done, especially if you read Hope of Elantris. There's like an implication that there's some settling. So I would want to follow some other people and maybe go into the broader world a little more, understand everything going on with the other religions and how they've manipulated the magic. Because Deloff had, and Hrathen to some degree, and a lot of them had utilized it to a sense, to some degree. And also Deloff is another one whose backstory we just kind of were like, by the way, he had a wife and the Elantrians failed to heal her properly, so then she was in agony and he like was determined to get revenge. And you're like, oh, we're finding this out right now in this like very short amount of time. Which that's not really related to the magic. But I just think that I guess I just wanted it, maybe not even that it needed to be less vague. I just wish it had played a little bit more of a role in the politics or in the religion, where I felt like it was more a part of the world, if that makes sense. Because it doesn't really, there's so many times that you can read certain chapters and you can forget that magic plays a role in this world, I suppose, except for when you're in Elantris, and then it's kind of a bigger deal. But I do want to kind of segue now into what I was just saying about if there was a sequel, if we ever get it, what would you want for that? So I'll let you answer, because I think you were the one saying you wanted the sequel, right?
Oh yeah, I definitely want the rest of the series. I do think his plan is not for it to be like a direct sequel, so it's almost like more of a companion-y type, more books set on Cell, but not
almost like this is a prequel.
Yeah. I think so. So I don't know whether he's planning on going back in time or forward in time or both, but I kind of want to see both. I kind of want to see pre-fall of Elantris and what else was going on in the world at that time, and whether any other like changes have happened, and then probably maybe quite far into the future. I can't remember where Elantris is in terms of the history of the Cosmere, but I think it's quite early, so I think it would be quite interesting to see kind of much later. I don't want to say too much because we're not into Cosmere spoilers yet, but yeah, I think I'd like to see companion-y with some before this and some after this.
Do you feel like that too, Abby?
I wonder if we would have had a different sequel if it had been published
right away
sooner. Yeah. Like, because I don't know, can't remember when this came out. Earlier 2000s.
Yeah, I think it's like 2005.
Like, if we'd got a sequel within 5 years of it getting published, would that have been more of a direct sequel? Whereas now, not quite 20 years later, but there's a lot has changed, or there's been a lot more Cosmere since then. So whether we're now going to get quite a different book to what might have been originally planned. I mean, I don't know if he did plan anything at the time or...
He did, yeah, he did. And it was 2005.
So I haven't really thought about what I would want out of it. Probably more an expansion of the world, understanding of that magic system as we spoke about, and maybe less so on the characters, because I feel as though I'm quite happy with the way they wrapped up.
Agreed. Do you feel like that too, Roger?
I mean, the magic nerd in me wants to see pre-fall Elantris, but I don't think that he would do that because that doesn't tie into the Cosmere as well. So I feel like what we will get will be more inter-Cosmere spoilery, because I am also curious about some of those things, but I don't want it to be a direct sequel. I think that Serene and Raoden should just be left alone. Like, it's fine. If we are going to continue forward in time, I'd rather be like UL and follow new characters, somebody else in the world, maybe from a different country, looking at their perspective as Elantris is regaining its magic and becoming a powerhouse again. I think I'd rather focus on something like that.
Mistborn Era 2 style.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with
Wayne,
that
without
completely.
freaking Wayne.
Without Wayne.
Okay, so Wayne's my favorite. I'm like the odd one out. I loved Wayne. I have a friend that reminds me just of him, though, like 1,000%.
So I feel awful being like, it's such an annoying person.
I mean, he is, but we still love him. But no, I agree. Like, way farther in the future, like Mistborn Era 2 style, I think would be really interesting to see with all the connections. And also, I feel very old hearing that 2005 was almost 20 years ago. It's
Right.
like, oh.
I know.
Yay.
When I realized that, I was like, oh, wow.
Right, when you think about it, you're like, oh. Okay. But no, I think we're all kind of in agreement there on do it Era 2 style, minus Wayne, like farther in the future.
Yeah, I think it could be pretty fun. Okay, so we've been all kind of like, oh, I don't want to say Cosmere spoilers. I don't want to say Cosmere spoilers. Do you have any other random thoughts or anything that requires you to give the Cosmere spoilers warning? We can say it now. So any other random thoughts before we talk a tiny bit about Hope of Elantris and Emperor's Soul? Cosmere thoughts, general thoughts. What do you think?
I just check, is everybody here caught up?
No, I haven't read Rhythm of War.
Haven't read Rhythm of War, but otherwise everyone's read everything?
Except for like Sixth of Dusk and...
Yeah, I'm missing a couple short stories.
Okay.
And
but I'm okay with spoiling myself on short stories. And I'll still, like, I'm a self-spoiler, so it's fine.
I'm like you. I'm fully caught up. Read White Sand. I've read all the Arcanum Unbounded.
I have read that. Oh, wait, that might be my least favorite. Let's go back. I forgot about that one.
What, White Sand?
Elantris better than White Sand.
I think he's going to be doing a prose version of that, which should be interesting. But I think what I find most interesting on a Cosmere basis with Elantris is it was the first Cosmere novel. It was also his first novel just in general published. It, as we've discussed, is not the most popular by any means. And yet it is the one that comes up the most often when you're thinking about Cosmere crossovers. Like, it comes up constantly, especially in the newer ones. And I find that fascinating. And it makes me even more excited for the sequels. Because I'm like, so Cell is like really important. And this magic system is really important. And we keep seeing it. So why is it so important? I need to know.
So do you feel like that's true of Elantris or more of Emperor's Soul?
Both. Just Cell in general, I'd say. But yeah,
I mean... Stupid? What things about... Because in my head, I'm like, definitely Emperor's Soul. I remember seeing stuff. What did Elantris...
Tress, the whole magic system got carried over with Hoyd. Hoyd can do the...
Okay. I'm like, I'm so dumb that I was like not even thinking secret projects.
I don't really want to answer that, Elle, because Abby hasn't read Rhythm of War yet. So I can answer that for you later.
Okay. When Abby leaves.
But I'm really curious because Elantris' magic system is so tied to connection to Cell. So how are they getting it to work off Cell? Are they having to have a new cord to the Aeons in order to get it to function properly? Like, what is happening?
That's why.
Yeah, the Aeons. I mean, the Aeons are so. Though that in particular, we've seen, but I don't know that I was thinking about that aspect. But in general, because the off-planet use of magic from other planets, I still feel like that's murky in general.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but Elantris is even more so because even
It's
on
tied.
Cell, as soon as they get farther away from
Right.
Elantris itself, the magic is weaker.
Right.
So how, if I can't even use it the next country over to teleport back anymore, how am I using it off in the cognitive plane or wherever the hell or whatever planet we were on with Trez? Like, how is that? What?
Yeah. Does it have to do with some things from Emperor's Soul, maybe? I don't know, like tricking something into thinking it's, you know what I mean?
The Aeons aren't particular to the city of Elantris, because Serene had Ash when she lived back wherever it is she lives with her dad.
Teod or whatever it's called. Teod. There's too many EO and AO in Elantris.
I start to question how you have the Elantris magic system on Cell, and you also have the Emperor's Soul magic system, and how you don't really see any overlap in each of their respective stories, but they're obviously on the same planet, but very different magic systems.
Yeah, I almost was like, are they on the same planet? I was like, are they on like different planets in the same solar system or something?
Or are they very different temporally?
I can't remember.
What was that, Sophia?
I was just wondering, are there 2 shards on Cell? I can't remember. I think it's just 1.
I think it's just 1.
Do the stamps though have things in common with what you write, but it's more of like a physical printing of it in a sense? Is that what it is? Because I read them like right back to back, and they do feel removed from me. Even the timeline though,
because they do. I'm actually not sure they do. I'm just thinking because I have the Cell box from Dragonsteel already, and there are a couple of stamps in there from Emperor's Soul, and they don't look anything like Aeons at all. So there were 2. Okay,
there were
fine.
2.
Thank you, Nicole.
Are they just not held by the same being? That's why.
Yeah, I think that's why I was like, I missed that, because I remember it being like a thing where but I missed that.
It is interesting to me
why there's different magic, because
that explains it.
It is interesting to me that in Emperor's Soul, they just know so much. They're like, there's the cognitive realm, the spiritual realm, the physical realm, and then this is how this interacts with this realm. And like, they know so much more, it feels like, than everybody else already, which is interesting given that it's not, even now having read it, it feels very significant to the overall Cosmere. How did I not read this before reading so many of the other things? It almost seems like a thing you should read first and then periodically reread as you get to certain points in your reading of the Cosmere. Just because there's.
I reread The Emperor's Soul midway through reading The Lost Metal.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't think I need to do a reread here. Let's just pause for a moment, reread this, and then I'll come back.
So I haven't read Emperor's Soul, but I did look up all the spoilers for myself, because I am that type of person.
It wouldn't have taken you that long to read it.
I know, but I was like in the car, like probably
it's a shame.
Literally, like in the car, like waiting for a kid to get done with something at that point. So I'm like, I'm reading. It was during Lost Metal too. I'm reading it, and I'm like, I feel like I need to look some stuff up.
I just was kind of like, I don't know who or what this is, and I will find out soon. Since we're kind of touching on it, I think we'll just jump into talking about Hope of Elantris and Emperor's Soul. Jesse, since you're a self-spoiler, you're welcome to stay.
I'm just curious at this point.
So Hope of Elantris, I'll be very brief. I mean, it didn't really feel necessary, but it did feel like if they were ever to do an adaptation, that whole little plot line, they could easily have incorporated that little girl and her dad-like figure into the plot more, so that you have that character to almost like the B plot in certain episodes. And it feels very cinematic, but I was also like, we don't need this. The only thing was like, oh, there's going to be a child in the royal family. That's like all that really came about as far as Serene and Raiden were concerned. What do you all think of Hope of Elantris?
I have got many feelings on Hope of Elantris.
I mean, it just felt unnecessary. It's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of cool seeing them practicing behind the scenes and some of that stuff, but
It just felt like a bonus chapter.
Yeah. Not necessary, I would say, if anybody ever.
I'm not mad that it exists. Like, there's nothing in it that I'm like, oh, this was so terrible. But I'm also not like, oh, I need to read this every single time. Like, who cares?
Okay, Emperor's Soul. Can we just jump into that then? That's all we needed for Hope of Elantris. Emperor's Soul. Okay, magic. I feel like that's the main thing because the plot was fine. I don't think overall thoughts that I felt particularly gripped by the characters. I wasn't really emotional. I'm sure you can dissect things and you can read a lot into it. And some of the themes actually remind me of some of the themes in Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. But I wouldn't say that I'm gripped so much by the story or the characters. It is for me the magic that I find interesting. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious everybody else's thoughts. We are going to be talking about Emperor's Soul now officially. So if anybody watching this needs to stop watching, if you don't want to see anything, then you can do that. But Sophia, what do you think?
So I've read it twice, and I think I'm still confused by it. And I think because the magic system, there's just so much going on that I'm just like, okay, so we need to do this to do that, and then we need this stamp, and she needs to. I couldn't even explain it to you, like how the magic system works. So it's just a massive contrast to me for an Elantris, where I'm just like, yeah, okay, so you do magic by writing a symbol in the air. Cool, fine, let's move on with our lives. That makes sense to me. Whereas now I'm just like, okay, so the objects, they have a history and they have a soul, and we can change that. We have to do that in a specific way.
Here's what it reminds me, I was saying before, it feels like a bunch of Sanderson's magic systems combined. Mm-hmm. So in one way, it feels like what Seiza does, where he's like, I store memories and things in these, and then when I put them in, I can like recall them, because that's kind of what she does with some of hers, where it's like, now I'm somebody who had tons of training.
The skills.
So there's that, and then when she talks about like objects remember in the cognitive realm, like this used to be stained glass, now it's a regular window, it's familiar with this, and it would rather be stained glass. It makes me think of in Stormlight when it's like, hold on, I'll make sure this is on the screen, of like, wouldn't you rather not be a stick? Wouldn't you rather be fire? And it's like, I'm a stick. It's kind of like that, I think. And even the way that Kaladin's mom is like, there's spren in everything. That's sort of what it feels like, where objects have this sentience almost. And you can, the same way that she does things to herself, she can do it to object. Not that I'm explaining it. I'm just saying that's my perception of like, it feels like this over here. It feels like this over here. Mm-hmm. What do you think, though, Abby?
I really like Emperor's Soul as a novella. I think I would have liked more. I feel like I would enjoy an Emperor's Soul sequel, or like a how does it go from being Emperor's Soul to the appearance in Lost Metal? Like, what are the steps that get to here? Like, because I would like to see that, or at least have sort of like an in between. And I like the magic. I guess I just took it at face value, really. Like, okay, the door thinks that it's more of an ornate door. Okay, we can make it that way by putting a stamp on it. Like, we can make that work. And I don't know, try and understand it too much. But yeah, I enjoyed the plot, and I think there is a lot of like elements that we do see in other Cosmere books.
I was pretty sure, and I just looked it up to confirm. I was like, is the person that betrayed Shay Hoyd? And it is. So I was like, I'm pretty sure. So what's Hoyd up to? You know, like, why did he do? That's her connection. Yeah. But it also makes me wonder, because of the way that they can kind of change their appearance and their mindset and things. It's kind of like what Shallan does. Feels a little Khandra-like. Yeah. There's just so much about it that feels like it's a combination of everything, which maybe that's why Cell is so important. Yeah. Because the capabilities of what it can do, it feels like. Roger, what do you think?
I I'm the same as you. I think the magic is the coolest part. I don't totally understand when people are like, "This is the greatest novella I've ever read of all time. It is pep." I'm like, okay, sure, I guess, but it kind of would require you to have some knowledge of. I don't think that you could jump into it blind from a non-Cosmere person and think it's the best novella ever.
My sister has only read Emperor's Soul out of all of Sanderson's works. The only thing she's read.
And is it the best novella of all time for her?
I don't think she's such a big reader that's a statement she would even ever make.
But I am curious to see, because I was looking at the timeline of the Cosmere, and Elantris 2 and 3 are supposed to be pre-Emperor's Soul. Emperor's Soul is pretty far, not super far future, but it's pretty far after Elantris. So hopefully we'll get some answers of how did the magic of Elantris get there? Because it seems like maybe it's not like a different place on Cell. Maybe it's just how their magic has progressed as it's become more technology-y and less reliant on people being able to do the magical fingers.
Yeah. But it does sort of have implications of what, because anytime someone shows up as a world hopper, I'm always like, is it a Kandra? You know, like that's my first thought is it a Kandra?
It's either a Kandra or it's an Elantrian. I feel like Elantrians travel all the time and they're all over the place. Why? How did that happen? But I think the Emperor's Soul for me is more interesting just in the Cosmere implications of it all. Like, it's not super interesting to me in and of itself, but it's like, well, how does that go there? How does, like, it makes me think more broader Cosmere.
Yeah. I feel similarly. I think Shay is cool. I want more of her. I think she's an interesting character. But you don't see that much of her. So I also think it doesn't help that because she is forced to condense the amount of time that this whole project would take, that it doesn't allow you to really see it in its full, you know, like you don't spend as much time with it in a sense. So anyway, I think she's interesting. I would like to see more of her. I still kind of think there's something to them being able to combine what they're doing with the Aeons, that combined with like making something the same way, because Raiden does that with his appearance, where he makes himself look like someone else. So instead of having this illusion, if he can just like stamp it into himself or whatever her things are, there's a lot of different things mentioned.
I think that's why I want the middle book. Like I want to be able to see how she manages
like
to
Roger.
grow. Yeah, because obviously since the time in Emperor's Soul to Lost Metal, she's made all of these stamps for herself to change her own appearance and mentality as if different events had happened.
I think she had a couple of them in Emperor's Soul already, but just didn't.
Does she? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think she does.
But she's made more because
I think forgery is a completely separate magic system to what they use in Elantris. I don't think
she'd made a stamp to turn her into an Elantrian, hadn't she?
She made a stamp to make herself a really good fighter. But she has stamps to make herself kind of whatever. So I don't really... Yeah. But it does feel like a lot of what Shallan does.
Yeah.
Because for a long time, I'm like, is this Shallan? Not a long time, but in the Lost Metal at first, I'm like, this person that's just sort of changing and altering and stuff. Obviously, it wasn't. But anyway, are there any more additional thoughts about the Emperor's Soul before we wrap it up?
It's cool.
Really. It's cool.
It's definitely worth reading.
I agree. Yeah. I'm glad I read it. And I do think that... longer. Yeah.
Well, I felt that way with everything Sanderson does. He's not a short form creator for me.
No.
He needs the time because I want the details. Now I kind of expect to understand the intricacies. I want the little Easter eggs. And for him to do that, he needs not Stormlight level pages, but he definitely is not like a short form writer for me.
It is funny to me that it's so intense, the amount of magic and the different things you can do with the magic. It's one of the most intense ones with the least amount of time.
Yeah.
And I almost wonder if that's intentional, to just kind of give you a taste and then have all these little things pop up in other Cosmere books, and then maybe we'll finally get more.
Maybe it was just he was doing with Emperor's Soul what he's ended up doing with the Secret Project, and that, you know, he just wanted to try a few things out and he didn't have time then to write a full novel. But he's like, I like this idea, I want to do it, so let me just write.
Or he just knew he wanted it later, because it does come back, obviously, in Lost Metal and stuff, so maybe it was his way of, like, I'm going to introduce it so it doesn't come completely out of left field when I use it again later, but I don't have time to.
I'll have to read the postscript for that one because I think he does elaborate on that, but I haven't read it yet, so I'll have to see. But now it's just I think the biggest thing is the excitement it makes me have because for this read along we're coming up on Oathbringer, Rhythm of War. You know, like I just am excited to see the way that certain things are starting. I mean, I'm still sad that I read The Lost Metal before I read this because it's where I feel like it's so in your face.
Yeah.
But still, it's just exciting to theorize, I suppose. But anyway, I think that's a good place to stop. Some of us will be carrying on over to chat about Yumi, which I am so excited for. So yay for that. I think this will probably go up after the Yumi video, though. So if you are somebody who's interested in watching a Yumi discussion, I'll have it linked. I'll have everybody's channels linked. But anyway, thanks so much for watching, everyone. Thanks to the other individuals for joining. We hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.